please let me know when we are live. Thank you so much. Hi, YouTube. Hello. Good morning. I hope everybody's doing well. We actually just had a caller who gave us a perfect segue into the segment that we're going to have today. And he was a caller who was asking about the fact that one of his friends who has switched from being a Democrat to being a Republican has basically, says that Democrats have a mental health illness. And so we sort of had that mini of conversation. But one of the things that I was suggesting was that you should not, one, have friends that are intentionally and willfully stupid, but you should also encourage these friends to take on a more woke education. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. YouTube, you guys missed this, but we have this intro to our Education for Liberation segment. So we are right now in an Education for Liberation segment. I see the lines are lighting up. We have not, I know what y'all want to talk about. We're not going to talk about that right now. I got some things to get through, and then we're going to talk about the thing that y'all want to talk about because y'all just heard the conversation we had. First things first, we had a conversation yesterday about the Texas House Democrats. Shout out to them. Can we just all stretch forth our hands towards whatever your listening device is and just pray a heat time, my bow time, arriving in a Hyundai, and pray for them because they are continuing to uphold the banner of resistance. Now, they ended up having to return to their home state. The special session is over, as we understand it, but they have really accomplished a lot. They have raised national awareness about what was happening with this racist effort to redraw these districting maps. They have sounded the alarm such that you've now got Kathy Hochul from the state of New York and Gavin Newsom and other Democratic governors who are trying to now look at whether or not they would be able to redistrict their lines as well. And while I am a redistricting purist in many ways, and I do believe that we should not have this sort of battle and this sort of effort, I'm not going to League of Women Voters my way into like oblivion. And the reality is we got to show up for what's happening right now. So shout out to them for standing strong. But it's still not over. Texas Democrats have been required to sign on to basically a freedom pass. And they can only leave the state house if they have their freedom papers. And in order to get their freedom papers, and yes, I'm invoking the language of enslavement intentionally, they can only get their freedom papers if they are willing to sign off on a permission slip that gives the local police officers the capacity to follow them wherever they go. And I mean that. So they basically have to agree to have the feds in their business everywhere they go in order to be able to leave. Nicole Collier is one of the Texas Democrat representatives who was a part of the group that left for quorum or left to break quorum. And she said, what I'm not doing is that. I'm not signing a permission slip that basically has me connected to an overseer. Like, you got this slave owner ass approach to governing, and you want this overseer to be able to follow me and literally follow them everywhere to make sure that they don't leave the state, to make sure that, I don't know, they don't make a break for freedom, massa. And so I want you all to listen to Nicole Collier in her own words as she talks about what she experienced. YouTube, I'm sharing this with you as well. Let's take a listen.
The speaker announced once quorum was restored, that the call of the House would remain, and any member that was out because of the quorum break would be required to sign a permission slip agreeing to be under the authority of DPS in order to leave the Capitol. I refused. I refused to sign the permission slip to be able to leave the Capitol. I disagree with that authoritarian tactic that they have taken. As being part of the minority party, we don't have a lot of victories, but we do have our principles. We still have our dignity, and we still have the right to protest and resist. I will have to stay here. I hadn't really given much thought. What matters to me is making sure that I resist and fight back against and push back. I'm sure I'll fall asleep eventually, whether that's in my chair or on the floor. I'm sure I will get some rest, but I'm so appreciative of my Democratic colleagues because they've been bringing me refreshments and encouraging me. In fact, I've asked the chair of the House Democratic Caucus, and he has joined me in a sign of unity and to resist this power, authority, control over us and what we're trying to do. It wasn't meant to be something. It was just something that I felt, and I thought about that little child in me when I felt like something was unfair. I didn't know what to do, but to stand.
And so she stood there for. And I love that she reminded us of what it was like for her as a child, remembering what it was like to see injustice and to then have to think about what you're going to do about it. And I love the fact that she decided what I'm going to do is to stand. Pray for that sister. What we've also seen, and this is something I discussed more in depth in the podcast episode that will be out later today at 2 p.m. One of the things that we also have seen is that there are other Democratic leaders who have decided that they are going to join with Nicole Collier, representative from, I believe, the 95th district in the state of Texas. And they were arrested this morning. There were 4 women being arrested by what felt like 11 different officers, like 11 different officers to come get these women who were like, some of them in dresses and sneakers, like who were also fellow representatives. It looks like one of them was Representative Lauren Ashley Simmons. I'm not sure about that because the footage was a little grainy, but you'll actually get a chance to hear that clip in the podcast episode as well. And so pray for them and then see if you can support them, support their campaigns. They are, again, being a Texas state legislator is not a full-time job. They get paid less than $10,000 a year. So when they leave for any amount of time to break quorum because they are in the minority and they have to do that at times, not only are they leaving their families, their children, their constituents who they have to communicate with purely remotely, but they're also leaving the other jobs, the other full-time jobs that they have that allow them to do that work. So keep them in their prayers. I want to now move into a segment. We have introduced this thing called New Rules. Today, we got new rules for Black parents. And one of the new rules for Black parents is that we have to recognize that Republicans suck at governing. And the reason we have to recognize that Republicans suck at governing is because Republicans are destroying education. We can look no further than the state of Oklahoma to talk about this. Now, I've already apologized preemptively to the educators in the state of Oklahoma, particularly those of you from our community. I know you are doing God's work. You are doing the Lord's work and doing everything that you can. But the reality is your education system sucks. And it's not your fault that it sucks, but it does suck. And I appreciate that you are doing everything you can to make it better. But the state of Oklahoma currently ranks 49th in median ACT score, 45th in median SAT score, 48th in reading, 44th in math, 46th in dropout rates, which is bad. You don't want to have. That's bad. 39th in student to teacher ratio. According to a new survey, Oklahoma has basically ranked 50th worst state, 50 out of 50 of the worst state for its school systems. Now, we know that the function of a school system often has a lot to do with funding. And we know that funding comes in a variety of ways. There's federal, state, and local funding. There's property tax funding, which I think is a really stupid way of funding education, because if you are going to artificially trap people into ghettos with redlining practices, and this goes out to Jeff and Tom, you should also talk about the fact that your friend, the Republican parties are obsessed with wherever Black people live, because what they love to do is keep us in cages, and they love to keep us in these ghettos, and they use redlining and banking and all sorts of other real estate industries to do that. So Tom, make sure your friend understands that Republicans are the ones who are obsessed with my genitals, they're obsessed with my race, and they're doing things that I ain't even thinking about them except to have to respond and keep my community safe. So anyway, back to Oklahoma. Sorry, YouTube. Y'all missed that phone call, so you don't know them connections, but Urban View, you understand the assignment. So basically, Oklahoma, like all schools, have funding issues that every school system might have and struggle with, but it's not just a function of how much money you have in your school, it's how you are using your resources. How you are using your resources. They scored 49th out of 51st on the ACT. They tied for third place along Arizona and Nevada, making it, again, among the lowest scoring states on everything. And I guess it is a function of money and how funds are applied, but it's also lack of competence. Now, as I said in the podcast episode, which again, you will hear later on today in the podcast, for those of you who don't know, it's called Lurie Breaks It Down. You can get it anywhere you get your podcast outside of YouTube. The challenge that we have to face is that being a good teacher is not a blank thing. It's not a you're a good teacher and that's it. You don't become a good teacher and then you're just certified and stamped a good teacher. You might be an amazing teacher on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, where all the socialites live and the whites tend to live. And if you are a great teacher on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and you have taught there your entire career, and the children who live on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, for those of you who don't know New York City, that's like the wealthy white people. And if you are a part of the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and that's the community that you have taught in, and the students that you teach have, from the time they have opened their blonde eyes up under their blue eyes under their blonde bangs, by the first time they've done that until the time they get to your classroom, if they've had all their needs met, they haven't had issues with hunger, they haven't had issues with housing instability, they haven't had healthcare issues, they have been able to get tutors when they needed to, they got special services when they needed to, and they were able to get access to special services without the stigma of being Black and in special ed. And they were able to have all of their needs met, again, from the time they opened up their baby blue eyes under their white blonde bangs. If those are the type of students you've been teaching, then maybe you're a good teacher. But if you couldn't go to East New York where the black folks live, where the kids who go to those schools are going to schools that are going to be considered underserved from the time that they open their chocolate brown eyes and their beautiful melanated skin until the time they get to your classroom, if you're going to be teaching in a school system, the same teacher where you don't have, those students have housing insecurity issues. They've got food insecurity issues. They've got healthcare insecurity issues. They're wondering about their parents and whether or not they have immigration issues. They got all the issues that socioeconomically disenfranchised people have. If you're a great teacher on the Upper West Side, but you get out to East New York and you suck, chances are you're not a good teacher. You were just good for the population that had no real need for your resources. That's different than being a good educator, because a good educator should be able to translate those skills to any community. But I know for a fact that a vast majority of the teachers who teach in well-to-do or all-white communities suck and fall on their faces when they go outside of that, because then you got a real challenge. And not to say that white communities and white students don't ever present an academic challenge. Of course they do. But your training in your teacher certification programs prepares you for whiteness. It prepares you for white children. It does not prepare you to meet the sociological, psychological, economic, and emotional learning needs, the unique set of learning needs that other children bring into the classroom. I will also say this. If you are teaching white children, you have to realize that those white children have descended from the class of slave owners. Whether their ancestors actually owned enslaved Africans or not is not the issue. They have descended from a class of people who have been socialized to see themselves as the best. And when you are educating black children, you are talking about children who have been socialized in the opposite direction. And so your school systems are going to be responding to the cultural needs of the students, and the school systems always respond to the cultural needs of the students. The question is, to which culture are they responding? And when you have black children and other non-white children in educational spaces that were not made for them, that were instead made for the needs of those who descended from the slave-owning class, if you are a child who descended from the needs of the enslaved class, your academic needs are different. And we know this because white children could not sit in a classroom where they learned the actual history about what their ancestors did. White children cannot sit in a classroom where they're learning the actual history of this country. They can only sit in classrooms where there's white mythology, Americanaism. And we know that that's the case because as soon as Black Lives Matter protests took off, and as soon as we started seeing wokeness in the classroom, which we're going to get to in just a little bit, what did white parents do? Oh my Lord, my child has come home asking all these questions about race. Where is the Moms for Liberty? Why is all this CRT? Where is Christopher Rufo and Bill Ackman when I need them? My whiteness is calling. That's the difference when it comes to education. What you carry into a classroom to meet the needs of white children is different than what you got to carry into a classroom to meet the needs of non-white children. Now, here's why this matters. In the state of Oklahoma, despite the fact that the state of Oklahoma sucks in every measurable category when it comes to education, the state of Oklahoma has decided that they are going to implement some tests, some limitations on who can actually teach in their schools. Now, let me just back up a little bit because I want to make sure that we're covering the full gamut of this conversation, because we're going to get to this thing that Oklahoma is trying to do in just a minute. When it comes to, or when compared to their white counterparts, the vast majority of black children do not measure academically as great. And that there's a lot of reasons for that. They're among some of the fastest group of children who are filling the school to prison pipeline due to structural racism. They are suspended and expelled 3 times more than white children due to structural racism. They are subjected to harsher scrutiny due to racism. They suffer from lower expectations due to structural racism. There are other systematic factors that follow black students, and as I've said before, almost like an ever-present shadow. They face the same racially discriminatory burdens as the rest of the black community. Their neighborhoods are often facing racially skewed economic policies when it comes to housing, when it comes to school funding, when it comes to disproportionate unemployment. Hello, have you seen the jobs numbers for us recently? When it comes to violence and other social ills. And if that were not enough, as Dr. Joy DeGruy has instructed us, they also deal with racist socialization, which is the adoption of a white supremacist value system, which has at its roots are based in race-based slavery. And at the value system, they're the heart of the value system of that. At the heart of this value system's foundation is this belief that white and whiteness and everything we associate with whiteness is better and superior, and that black and blackness and things we associate with it are inferior. Now, this would all be the case if it were not for the fact that we also have additional information that we have to consider. And that information comes to us from a number of wonderful resources, like this report by the Heinz Endowment that was produced in 2009. It's called Cultural Responsiveness, Racial Identity identity and academic success, and it's a review of the literature. And it's basically a review of more than nearly 3,000 sources that look at, that study and examine and explore what the connections are between a culturally responsive education, racial identity, resilience, and achievement. And what they have found is that when you provide a culturally responsive education, an education that is rooted in taking the child's experiences, their frames of reference, their expertise, and what they bring to the table, and you structure your education around that. When you provide them an education that speaks to and through their experiences, you are going to produce geniuses, not because you're producing it, but because you are creating a set of external stimuli that will pull that genius out of them. Is this making sense? Amina, does this make sense? I feel like there's a lot of words in my head, and I'm trying to get back to Oklahoma, but I just want to make sure that this makes sense. Now, the challenge that we're facing is that most educators are prepared to teach white children. They're not prepared to deal with the issues that black children have. But research shows, there was a phenomenal study out of Harvard and University of Pittsburgh. Research shows that black children in particular, but all students of color, including white, because white is a color. White is a color. Students, but black children in particular, students perform best in settings that build on their culture and promote their racial identities. Going back to this study from Harvard and the University of Pittsburgh, they found that when black parents empower black children with positive racial socialization, and remember, racist socialization is the adoption of the slave master's value system, but racial socialization is a recognition that you come from a long line of ancestors. There are people who believe in you. We did phenomenal things. You understand our history before enslavement, before colonization. You understand how that history is related to who we are today. You have an understanding as to what colonization and enslavement did to us as people. When you provide that for black children perform better academically. In fact, racial pride, according to this study from Harvard and the University of Pittsburgh, racial pride was the single most important factor. The single most important factor. Let me get my Umar Johnson, say it 3 times. The single most important factor in protecting black students was having a sense of racial pride. Being woke is the most important factor for black children's education. Racial pride, in fact, according to Harvard and the University of Pittsburgh, racial pride has, quote, a direct impact on students' grades, their future goals, and their cognitive engagement. I didn't say it, argue with Harvard. And so if you are a good teacher on the Upper West Side, that does not mean you are a good teacher. It means you are a good teacher for white children because you are responsive to their culture. And that is all that means. Black children have a different set of needs, not because black children are inferior, but because white ancestors created a system that structurally created differences that are going to require a different type of education, because the children of the enslaved have a different set of learning needs than the children who descended from the slaveholders. We should be able to say that. And this is why Oklahoma sucks in education. So Oklahoma has decided, despite the fact that they suck in every level, despite the fact that they are at the bottom rung of every single metric and category, they've decided that not just anybody can come teach in Oklahoma. Oh, no, no, no. If you're going to come to Oklahoma, despite the fact that they have a lot of diversity in Oklahoma. We had attorney Demario Solomon Simmons, who went to school in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and he said he ain't learned nothing about the Tulsa the race massacre until he got to college. Oklahoma, you suck when it comes to education. But they have decided that despite the fact that they're at the bottom of every statistical category, they are going to instead determine that woke, the one element that is actually mandatory for black children's education, is forbidden from their schools. Take a listen to this report from Fox News.
All right, so for anybody who's got teachers in their family in Oklahoma, this is a story you'll probably want to listen to, because there are teachers that are relocating there from progressive states who will now be evaluated on the America First agenda. Oklahoma as a state now is going to require new teachers pass an America First test to keep their license. They're going to have knowledge of the U.S. Constitution, an understanding of American exceptionalism, a grasp of fundamental biological differences between boys and girls. Perhaps for some, this sounds like common sense.
It's called science and history.
I have many teachers in the family in Oklahoma, so I'll have to get their thoughts on all of this. But I don't know. See any problems with this, Griff?
Well, no. If you're from a progressive state, you're coming from New York, you're coming from California, you're coming from Illinois, this is what you're going to have to do. In fact, the Oklahoma State school superintendent had this to say about it.
President Trump is the one fighting for fairness and keeping the rest of the country from becoming this woke dumpster fire that's in California. That's why we announced today, if you're going to come from California to Oklahoma to teach, we're going to make sure you take a test and understand basic biology before we let you in a classroom. We partnered with PragerU on this and said, hey, if you don't know the difference between a boy and a girl, you're not teaching our kids. Gavin Newsom has worked their entire school system there in California.
Seems reasonable. And of course, lots of states are having to deal with these progressives who are moving out of the woke dumpster fires like California.
Yeah.
And they're having to figure out, like, please don't bring your
Let's pause it there. Y'all might remember that man who was just talking, the superintendent. That's the same white man who's in charge of the schools who wanted to spend $6 billion, some untold. It had to be millions. It had to be millions because it's Oklahoma. They ain't got that much money because your Republican leadership sucks. But they wanted to spend $6 million on Trump Bibles, which costs about $59 a piece. You get a Bible for free. You get Bibles for free. But they wanted to spend $6 million of their dollars. Remember when we talked about school funding? They wanted to spend $6 million on Trump Bibles. And they're concerned about woke teachers. Even though woke teachers are coming from states that are far superior in terms of outcomes. So we have fashioned this in a way as of saying sort of that black children have particular learning needs. And that's often where we rest, right? But I think we should push back on this. It's not that black children have learning needs because black children can overcome a whole lot. The reality is white children and their families are simply too delicate to learn real history. And I think we should just say that. We should just acknowledge that the whites, they're very fragile. At least the ones who are concerned about woke, the Ryan Walters of the world, very fragile. Oh, wait, isn't Ryan Walters, in addition to wanting to spend $6 million on the Bibles, ain't he the one that got caught at his superintendent's meeting showing a whole bunch of porn and women on their backs on a chiropractic table with their legs up in the air and their breasts and everything hanging out? That is the same Ryan Walters. So while he is worried about woke, maybe he need to worry about scrubbing his search feed. Maybe he need to worry about some other things because it's the wrong message. It's the wrong message. But perhaps it's not so much about black children's learning needs, because black children's learning needs are historically grounded. All children need a culturally responsive education, and white children always get it. White children always get it. Why? Because all of our schools are designed to be culturally responsive to the needs of whiteness. And maybe that's why we should begin acknowledging that there is something wrong with a society that can only teach its children lies. Perhaps there's something wrong with a group of people who are so concerned about the truth that they fear it, that they can't learn it. And we could quibble and worry about what the whites should do about their inability to learn anything and actually compete in the real world. We have an entire segment called The Fragile Whites that deal with that. But as it pertains to us and our kids, well, your kids going back to school this fall in racist America where white nationalism is rampant, that means you going back to school this fall in racist America where it's rampant. That means you are going to do the power work assignments of making sure that you know when every PTA meeting is at. You know the school calendar. You know the policies for when you can come in and observe a classroom and when you can't. And maybe you can't observe every single classroom, but you got a village of people who can. I got my mama living at the house. She finna be my PTA partner. She's going to be my PTA partner. Perhaps it is time for us as black people to realize that we pay these tax dollars and that we have to show up and we have to demand that our educators are going to provide a culturally responsive education for our children, because what we know is that while the whites, the fragile ones anyway, while they need a very delicate type of education for their very fragile brains because they cannot deal with the harshness of history and the realities thereof, our kids need real shit. Our kids need real education, and our children need education that's going to be provided for them in a way that will not fear racial pride, because the only reason they fear wokeness is because for them, wokeness means black people who got their backs up. Wokeness for them means black people who are able to stand up straight and demand things. Now, these black children who get a culturally responsive education, yeah, they're going to challenge the teacher more. Yep, they're going to participate more. Their grades are going to improve. Their attendance is going to improve. They're more likely to go to college, and they're more likely to then be able to use their education to address the needs of the communities from which they came, as opposed to using their education to just get a job working for white people and learning how to code switch so that they're effectively able to get paid a whole lot of money and then move out of their communities entirely, leaving no one there with the resources, the knowledge, or the time to actually solve those problems. So it's not so much about what we're going to do about education generally. It's more for me about how we are going to do the power work assignments of protecting our kids and make sure that our kids get access to the type of education that they need. One that is woke as fuck, because that's what our babies need. And quite frankly, as a Black parent, I am tired of sacrificing the needs of my children so that the delicates can have an education that's more sensitive to them, because their mommies and daddies simply don't have the scope, the scale, the balls, or the tits, or the ovaries, or the scrotums, or anything else that you might suggest that one might need to call on for strength. They don't have the ovarian fortitude to handle real history, real education, real information. That's on us. But if we don't demand it for our kids and then fight for it and push for it with every one of our breaths, then we're really no better than the fragile whites. And I don't have time for that. We are going to head into commercial break. YouTube, we appreciate you. Love y'all. Urban View, we got lots